All right, friends. So we are talking about the mock belt exam. We are walking through this. Again, this is a collective group. It is a collective sort of build. So it's not just me talking, it's us doing this as a group, as one. And also just the point is to give you tips and tricks on how to approach certain things, how to handle certain things, and what I would do in that regard. So just so you know, what the belt exam looks like is something very, very similar to this. And let's read it and identify sort of what's going on. Our task is to clean and explore data for a nonprofit organization focused on promoting youth literacy rates using this data. First thing I would do is either download the data there, or I would get the data somewhere, save it into my Google Drive. Want to make sure, even if you are whatever you're doing, if you're like, I'm going to do it all right now, just in case, like even the login crashes or something, weird happens, save this information so that way you have it so you can keep working. Even if, let's say, Coding Dojo's website goes down, right? Just save it, have it, just eliminate any potential stressor you have. Just do everything you can to eliminate that. So I'd grab that. And then this is the part that's really important. They are particularly interested in understanding where they should focus on their next project and what strategies to use to have the biggest impact in increasing youth literacy rates in that area. Okay, so we have our goal, right? We don't want to just evaluate my data. What we're trying to do with this data is understand it, so that way we can apply and take our understanding and apply it for a next project to have an impact on increasing literacy rates. So we want to make sure if we're doing any sort of multivariate visualizations, if we're not understanding actual literacy rates, then it's not, if we're comparing two things that don't do that, then we're not answering that question, right? So it's really important to know what the question and what we're trying to accomplish and what we're trying to handle. Here's the data right there. Again, download it. So it's going to be broken up in two sections. This first section is everything we've already done. It's really basically weeks 1 through 2. So it's taking in data, cleaning data, replacing missing values, handling it in every facet there. On the other end, we're going to have part 2, which is our visualizations. We've already gone over univariate very basically. We're going to talk a little bit tomorrow. Maybe I'll do a little breakout at the beginning of class. I will, on just sort of like Seaborn and doing a little bit more intricate univariate versus just doing it very basic using Matplotlib like we did yesterday. So you're going to have 2 different types. So that means you can't have 2 histograms looking at 2 different columns. You're going to have 2 different types. Now I gave you 3, just use 2 of them. Now make sure they make sense, right? Don't use what is the type of sort of data point that you can use a bar chart on? Does anybody remember?
Was it categorical?
Yep, exactly. It was categorical, right? And then your histogram and your box are numeric. So just make sure you're using that correctly. If you use a bar chart on a numeric value, I'm not going to count that as a type, right? That's not going to count. Cool. And then you're going to have 2 different types of multivariate. That's what we're going to go over tomorrow. That's basically comparing more than one column. So, reading rates over time. So I am going to talk a little bit and show you how to do that today. Now, if you're super confused, that's okay. We're going to talk about it tomorrow. So it is just a little bit of a weird timing. I didn't want to do this on Friday. So that way you guys could start your exam, but it's a little bit early. So you might get a sneak peek for tomorrow. The other thing you're going to get is this data dictionary, which we've talked about a couple times. This is really important for you to know. This is what the column name should be, right? So if we see something differently, then we want to handle that. Now, one thing I will say is if you see literacy rate here is a lowercase r, but it's uppercase R, and the other one, it's not as big of a deal. You don't really need to go in and clean it to fully match. It's like if region is something totally different, or if it was literacy _ rate, you would want to change it to literacy rate. So does that make sense? Like the capitalization of rate in this is so minute that it's not going to affect anything. So if on our data, it does say, I don't think it does, but if it did say like literacy R rate, That's fine. Don't worry about it. The big
Right,
part we're going to really want to focus on is making sure our data types are good. And then we are going to have descriptions of each value. There was a question, David?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to bother your question. So
you're
basically, for the column name, so in terms of syntax, so like in this case, it wouldn't really matter in general what the syntax is. It's all about just pretty much what the column name is defining, correct? So if you were to do data analysis.
No, like if this was literacy underscore rate, you would want to change it to literacy rate. What I was saying is like if there was a capital R, that's not as big of a deal as like having underscores or more extra like extra words or something of that nature, like unnamed or column 0. That's what we want to change. If it's like a minute like little thing like that, that's not a big deal. But I think getting into the habit of making sure it matches your data dictionary is not a bad habit. Just saying you're not going to get like, you're not going to fail your test if you didn't change the R from a capital to this lowercase.
Okay.
So don't get more of what I'm trying to communicate is don't get so caught up on that stuff, right? Like handle your duplicates, handle your missing data, make sure everything looks good, and then we go forward.
All right, gotcha.
And then, yeah, of course. And then this is just a description of how literacy rate is created. So, okay, cool. So that's what you're going to get for your exam. It's going to look very, very similar to this. You're going to have a data dictionary. You're going to have the different questions you're going to have to answer. And then you're going to have a, you're going to have your data set. So in handling that, let's go ahead and bring this in. So I've got my mock belt exam. I like to just go ahead and bring it. Like I just brought this information in. It's something for us to refer back to if we need. You don't have to do that. The way I did it is just I created a text box. And then if I look at it, this is my data dictionary, this big long line, but I just made it out. You don't have to do this. Like don't waste your time if you don't have to, but just make sure, I did it just for simple reference if I wanted it. Cool. Now, instead of downloading it, I am just going to use a URL simply for the sake of this. I, again, would download this information for sure. So download this information. I'm just going to do this for the sake of this guy right here. Okay. I'm also going to import, I don't think I'm doing anything with NumPy, but I'm going to bring it in anyway. And then if I want to, I'm going to import Seaborn. That's another one that we can use as SNS. Cool. So I'm going to run this. And first, this is the first thing you're going to do always, right? Is you're going to get your data. I'm importing it. I'm running it. Cool. So I've got my data. I've got my certain columns. I've got region, country, year, age, gender, literacy rate. All right. What's sort of the first step I would do now? If you guys had your data, what's some of the first things you can run?
I'd say run .info just to give an overview as to what missing values there are and what your column names are.
Yeah. So I'm going to say df.info. Now I'm going to run this and I want to show you two things that I've seen a couple of you guys do. So if I run .info, it does give me some information, not really helpful. But I just want to point out, if you ever see a bound method, if you ever see the word bound method, that means that you forgot a parentheses in your call. So if you get a bound method error, that just means add a parentheses. And this is my info. Cool. So looks like my data is good, right? I don't have any, I have a couple missing values, right? In my region. Now, one big thing let's do is let's check our data types. Okay, so I've got an object, country is supposed to be an object, year is an int, good, age, gender are objects, and a float. So it looks like immediately off the bat, I've recognized literacy rate has an issue, right? Literacy rate is supposed to be of type float, but in fact, it has it is of type object. So what I'm going to do is I'm just gonna kind of pocket that in the back of my mind because here we give you, and I'll give you like a starter. What I'm gonna give you tomorrow is sort of a template of like a starter template for your exam. So that way you will have everything I'm grading you on. So that way you can go from top to bottom and make sure you hit everything. So there is no surprises. I'm not trying to throw you any curveballs. So first and foremost, I have identifying any missing values and ensure each column's data types. I know I'm going to have to do that. So I'm just going to save it sort of in the back of my mind to know, okay, I'm going to have to change that value. But first and foremost, we've looked at my data. We did .info. Now I want to identify and address any duplicate values. How am I going to do that? Let me just go ahead and. Anybody other than David? No offense, David, but I don't want you answering every question. How am I going to handle and identify any duplicate data, any duplicate values?
Duplicated.
What is it? I'm sorry.
With dot duplicated. DF dot.
DF dot duplicated. Okay. Just like that.
No, parentheses, and then you do dot sum parentheses.
Yeah. So if I do this, it gives me, okay, I've got 0 duplicates. Okay, well, that's good. Now on your exam, something I would encourage you guys to do, and I'm really going to ask that you guys do because it will help me grade your exam much, much faster, is after you answer one of these questions, just say something like there were no duplicates. And then that lets me know, okay, cool. I see your code. I have your answer, right? We want to make sure we're explaining what's going on in my code and what I'm doing. If you guys explain what you're doing, I can sort of at least follow your thought process and pattern. If you don't do that, it's much, much harder for me. Okay. So we've handled that. We've handled our duplicates. That was pretty easy, right? That's an easy half a point. Next, I want to identify and address any missing values in the data set. Deal with these appropriately. Include a brief description of the method you used to deal with missing values along with the justification for that method. So if I'm looking at my info, I do see that I've got one column, right, that has some missing values. So let's say I'm going to create a text. Okay. So if I'm wanting to handle my missing values, what's a way that I can do other than .info, but what's another way I can see if something's missing?
Is NA.
Yeah, is NA. Help me understand. What am I typing here?
DF dot is NA parentheses and then dot sum parentheses.
Yeah, absolutely. So here I can see, all right, so region I've identified there is 5. And this is really important. And I would encourage to run this, especially if we have a ton of columns, right? Right now, it's pretty simple for me to go through and check like, oh yeah, okay, region. Get in the habit of doing this. And if you have, 20 or 30 columns, then that's a way different, it's a lot easier to miss something, even if it's just one. It's a lot easier to miss something with that. So get in the habit of handling that. Okay. So I can see from here that there are 5 missing values in the region column. Cool. So let's investigate. Let's investigate the missing and the rows with missing information. Okay. So if I'm wanting to do that, does anybody know how I could get the specific rows that are missing?
So I looked this up on Stack Overflow
Mhm.
and they showed me to use .any.
Got any?
Yeah, so I did df.lock, which I was gonna try. I was trying to iLock first, but I didn't know the specific rows. So then I was like, okay, let me try what lock. And then I did df.isNA, parentheses, and then I did .any, and then the access for one, 'cause I wanted just the rows.
So you said dot any, like that?
Yeah, and
And then
in
what do I do next?
in the any, I did access equals 1. I just want,
AXIS,
yeah,
okay,
yeah, that's what I did.
okay, yeah, that would have got it. Absolutely.
That looks pretty good. I like it.
So method 1 is that way. If there's another method we could have done, that works perfectly fine. There's no, I wouldn't say one is greater than the other. It's just saying df of, and then taking that specific column. So I could say df of region. Okay. Dot is an A. So saying in that column, just get the values where they are null. Going into that column, getting all the null values, and then I'm getting all of the rows within my DF that is true, which are the same exact thing. So both work, right? Both are exactly the same. Okay. So we know that we see there's a couple things going on. We see that there's some similarities between my missing values, right? I've got this as a country of Afghanistan, and these both have that, and then these both have a country of Uzbekistan. All right. So because we know that, we can look and say, let's go ahead and see, are there any, or I guess before I say that, what's something we can do? Now we have this information. What would you guys do next? We're missing a region. What would you guys do?
I looked at the labels for the other countries. I looked at rows where it said Afghanistan, rows where it said Uzbekistan, what was listed in the region.
Yeah, that's a great idea. So now I can check to see if rows with same country exist. If so, what is the region value? Okay, so very simply, I could create a filter, right? And actually, let's do that. Let's go ahead and create a Afghanistan filter and an Uzbekistan filter, simply because I've noticed quite a few people are struggling with filters. So let's create a filter. How would I create? I'm going to say Afghanistan filter. I'm actually just gonna, I don't want to keep writing Afghanistan and Uzbekistan. I'm gonna say a filter equals. How would I filter out? I would just want all of the rows where Afghanistan is a country. What would I say here?
This might be wrong, but I would have done DF brackets and then do your quotations and put country, close your bracket, the equal, and then put Afghanistan quotes.
Copy and paste so I make sure that everything is good. Okay, so let's just see what a filter gives us if I do that. Cool, I get a lot of trues, some false. Okay, hey, that's the way to go. That's one way to do it, Miranda, absolutely. Now, if I wanted to see all the rows that did have Afghanistan, what could I do? I've got this filter, which is this Boolean expression, right? If I would now wanted all the rows where that expression was true, what could I do?
You'd put that filter in the brackets of your DF.
Yeah. So if I just said df of a filter, is that it? Is that all I do?
Yes.
That's it.
Let's try it. Yeah. Right. That's one way I can do that. I just pass in that filter and I get all these. There's another way, right? So that's, I'm gonna say method 1. Method 2. Method 2 is if I said something like df.loc, right? df.loc takes in 2 things, right? I have to pass it a row and I have to pass it a column. Well, which rows do I want? I want the ones where all the filter is, a filter is true. And pandas, if I pass in this filter, it breaks it down and says, oh, only the rows where this is true. And then I want all the columns. Oops. Perfect. So if I run this, I get the same thing. Both work. Both are fun. Okay. So just like Ashley said, I can look and say, it looks like all the other rows that have Afghanistan are part of the Central and Southern Asia. Cool. So now I can assume, right? Because I've looked at my data, I'm going to assume that I'm just going to change this value to Central and Southern Asia. Would you guys say that that's a good assumption?
Absolutely.
Cool. Cool. So, I can do that. Now, before I do that, that's just for Afghanistan. Let's go ahead and create my Uzbekistan filter as well. So I'm gonna call this U filter. We're gonna do the same thing. Where I'm gonna say df of country equals Uzbekistan. Cool. And then let's go ahead and check that out. I'm just gonna do this because this is easier. Okay. Well, I see that Uzbekistan got all these guys right here. They all are also Central and Southern Asia. So they both are Central and Southern Asia. So it seems like all of my missing data points are of Central and Southern Asia. Cool. So now that I know that, right, and I might just also just say, in looking at the data and rows with the same countries, I can see that the region or all missing values should be Central and Southern Asia. Okay. Perfect. So now let's go ahead and do that. I've identified that's what we need to do, right? How would I do that?
Fill NA.
Yeah. So I want to say df.fill_NA.
DF bracket, and you're gonna put in the column region
Yeah.
and then dot fill A. And then you're gonna do parentheses. You're gonna write the string Central and Southern Asia. And then comma in place equals true.
Yeah. Now, one thing to note is make sure before you do this, that this is correct. The Central and Southern Asia. So like, I'm going to run this, do this one more time. Because if you have it even a little bit different, you're not really going to notice it because you're going to not have a null value, but it still is going to be different. So I like to just copy and paste, honestly. I don't want to have, if I would have done this right here, this would have been a different, this would have been a whole different style. So make sure that you don't have specific spaces in anywhere as well. Like if I would have done dot value counts because there was a white space in front of that, the white space plus Central and Southern Asia is just different than just Central and Southern Asia. So please make sure you do that. Okay. So now I am filling in my values. Perfect. Now I can say df dot is NA dot sum. I no longer have any missing values. Cool. Any questions on that? How are we feeling? Making sense?
So far, yeah.
Cool. Are there any questions while you guys have me? Anything that's not making sense to anybody before we keep going?
Will, I just,
Somebody in the chat did ask about is NA or is null. They're the exact same thing. You can do either one interchangeably.
okay, that I was just gonna ask about that because the question says, why did you use that one? If there's no difference, like what will we put for that? Like any simple answer or?
Do you mean include a brief description?
Yeah,
The part? So the description is if you let's say that, you know, in your project, you had to deal with the item weight, and there's a couple ways you could have done that without dropping. You could have done either the mean or the median. And so what it's trying to say is if there's a couple ways you could have filled that in, especially if it's like a numeric
Oh,
value, just say,
okay.
why did you fill it in that way?
okay.
Or with the I think it was like outlet size or something like that. You could have filled it in with missing in case I needed to do that, or look, I know that a couple people, I think Raja, did you do like filled it in an awesome way? And you could have done missing, and I did missing because really the idea
yeah.
behind that part is there's a couple ways you can do it, and it takes a little bit of sort of your own intuition, if that makes sense. Like there's not necessarily, I mean, there is in some regards a more wrong way, but there's multiple ways to do something. Just explain your thought process is what that's saying.
Okay.
Yeah. Why would you do mean over median? Something like that. Does it make more sense? Not
Yeah.
specifically the method you use, not like is null versus is null, but you know, why
Okay.
did we fill it in with Central and Southern Asia? It's because looking at the data like this and looking at the data and rows with the same countries, I can see that the region for all missing data should be this. So that's why I filled it in, because I looked at the other rows,
Mhm.
identified that, and so I'm going to fill it in with that. That's what that's saying.
Okay.
Good question. Good clarification. Anybody else have anything?
Well, I have a question, but it's about the policy.
Mhm.
So I know we're allowed to look at our notes, and it says that if we use something from our notes or like Google, we're supposed to cite the sources. Does that
Mhm.
include like stuff like if I copy the whole import pandas, import numpy, import matplotlib.pyplot,
No,
and
no, and we're going to talk about policy tomorrow. But it's more of if there's something like if you just see .info, you don't have to be like, Will taught me this. Like, you know, like that's a very basic thing. If you did something a little bit more intricate, or if you did go to Stack Overflow and you found something a little bit more like that for loop that we created that showed that, if I'd never showed you that and you came with that information, you know, I might say like, huh, how did you come up with that? Right. Or if you did find it, it's 100% fine. If you find it, just say, hey, you know, adapted from, or code came from blank. That's fine. It doesn't hurt your grade. It doesn't do anything. It just is part of like sort of the honor of, you know, I didn't come up with this code. Because if there is something really intricate that you come up with, you know, there is a very strict zero policy cheating. So like taking other people's code and claiming it for yourself, that's a big no-no and can be grounds for academic dismissal. So if somebody does come up with something really insane, and what would happen is I would have a meeting with you and I'd say, help me understand what's happening here. And if you can't explain the code, then that lets us know that you stole it and adapted it from something else without and claiming it as your own. Versus if you do steal it, that's fine. Just say adapted from, or inspired by this code. And then we'll say, okay, great job to cite your source. Because part of this is part of the job is to Google, right? But we just want to make sure that we're not sort of claiming other people's work as ours. Does that make more sense?
Yeah.
But the very basic stuff of like is not some, you don't have to like link this video or link some other thing, like you're fine there. It's really also comes from if we're dealing with visualizations and you have a really intense like interactive visualization, which I'm not teaching you guys. If you to do that and you claimed like, oh, I just did that, I'd be like, oh, help me understand what's going on. That kind of thing is what it is trying to negate.
So I'd say, like I would say to be honest, I'd say the more likely scenario in which I will have to, pretty much cite the source would be if I were to, add in some like special visualization effects to pretty much box plots and pretty much any like bar charts or anything like that's visual. I guess if I were to add special effects, then if I were to use that,
so like
that's why I would cite it, right?
Yeah. If you, cite anything that you use, right? If you find a different way to, do something that you didn't know before, it's okay. Like I always say, oversight. You don't have to, don't to where it's such a burden to where you're like, oh my gosh, the platform, I'm citing it over and over. But if you just find a more unique, like use your sort of judgment. If you find a more unique answer, roundabout way to figure something out, then cite that. That's okay if you cite it. I'm not going to like go check the site and be like, is it live? Like as long as you cite it, you're good. So
I got you.
cool. Okay. So the next thing we've done, we have identified and addressed any duplicate values. We have now handled any missing values. Now let's ensure that that all columns, sorry, it's been a long day, match the data types listed in the data dictionary. And we already identified, right? In my .info, we identified that my literacy rate is supposed to be a float, but it in fact is an object. So just what I'm going to do is, just for the sake of sanity, is I'm going to say check data D types. So I'm just going to say df.dtypes. And that's going to get me all my data types. Again, that's so that way I don't have to scroll all the way back up. I can just run this D types again. I know that that's supposed to be a float. So I see that there is an issue with that, right? I can even write literacy rate should be a float, but it is an object. So let's go handle that. So if I go here, now I know that I said if something is if something is numeric, we don't want to do value counts. But if something is an object or is supposed to be if something is supposed to be a number, so either an integer or float, but it's coming up as object, a quick way to value or to see that is a couple different ways. One would be df, and then I tag that df literacy rate. And I'm gonna say dot sorted, sort values. And if I sort my values, I'm going to look, okay, I've got this value all the way down. I see that instead of 45% instead of it being 45% or however we have percent, somebody actually put the percent sign, which makes this a string. But if I'm also looking at this, what else is the issue here? Anybody notice?
The 426 down, they don't have decimals.
Yeah, but they're just one. So if the highest value other than this 45 is 1, what would that tell me about my data?
That one is 100%.
Yeah, exactly. So, and does it make sense for this to be 445.38?
No.
No, definitely
No.
not.
So
I'm gonna have to convert it. but we'll get there. We'll get there. Okay. So I'm gonna say recognize two things. Oops. So the first one is someone added a percent sign, which made it an object. Remember, if we even have one string and the rest are floats, it's going to make it an object. And then secondly, one is the highest value outside problem row. So I will assume, and this is where, sort of help me understand your thought process. So I will assume that 1 equals 100%, meaning I will have to convert this value as well.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So just going off of what instructor Josh said, but when dealing with floats, to try to just change it and using the error code as finding out what the issue is that okay to do during the mock exam, or should you just do sort values?
Yeah. So you could have said something like,
Because he literally just said to like, oh, take the column and just put it as type as the type you want, and then you're going to get the error and it will tell you.
yeah. So if I said as type float, see
Right.
what this gives me. Yep. So it's going to say could not convert string to float 45.38%.
So is that okay to do on the exam, or is it better to not have like an error in your code?
I would prefer that you, and here's why. I understand what he's saying. If you have a super large amount, I would prefer that you try to do another route, because then I'm not going to see how you got it. You're just going to take this, delete it, and then change the code and say, how did you find out where that was? So I would prefer something like this, because then what if I had multiple percents? You're just going to have to keep running that. I would say that, if you couldn't find it here, then go ahead and run it and just leave it. If you are going to do that, just comment it out and say this was error or something of that nature. Just leave me a comment and let me know. So David, actually, we would prefer, because the idea is that I can actually press runtime and run all. So that error message, that's why I'm saying comment it out, because I want to be able to run your entire code and make sure that there aren't errors. If there is an error, go ahead and change your code. So if you are going to do this, make a comment and then let us know. Comment this out and then say, use this method to identify where the error occurred. You could do either.
So basically, I could just literally explain what the error message entails. Just to say basically this is what happened. It'll generate error message stating that it can't be converted, right? So I can pretty much just explain in the comments instead of just showing the error message, correct?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Cool. So I have identified this. So let's go ahead and change it. Now, if I want to see this specific row, let's go ahead and create a filter. So I'm going to say percent filter. And that's going to be equal to what? Anybody know? I'm dealing with a string here. Specifically,
you want it to equal the percent sign.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. How would I do that?
So df dot, I said df dot literacy, df bracket literacy rate. The double equal percent sign.
So if I do double equal percent sign, if I did this, that's going to go through every single value and say, does it equal percent? So 45.38% does not equal percent. Anybody else have a crack? You're
So,
really close though.
so
So it'd just be that 45.3.
bigger than 1, because you know that that's gonna be.
You could. What if I had multiple rows that had percentage signs? I could say something like str
Right.
dot contains. So I'm gonna go through and all the strings, I'm gonna say if it contains a percentage, that's what I want my filter to be. So I can say df of percent filter. And then I just get my one row. You could have also said equals equals, just like David was saying, 45.38%. That's like sort of a hard coding perspective. This would be a great, getting in the habit of something that's reusable, right? To where if I've got multiple percents, this is going to help versus if we just hard code or sort of brute force that. So this gets me this value here. Okay, perfect. Okay, so first off, I've got to get rid of this percent sign. Does anybody have any ideas on how I could do that? That's not Ashley or David. No offense to either of you guys. I want to make sure that everybody's voice is
Not
heard.
replace.
Yeah. Okay. So walk me through. How am I going to do this? Or yeah. So we'll do. Go ahead. Do you have?
Like DF and then brackets, literacy rate,
Uh-huh. Okay.
and then set that equal to DF, literacy rate. And then like dot replace.
Okay. Now remember that because I'm dealing with a string, I have to say str dot replace. Because if I just replace the value, then it's going to take out everything, right? But I want to replace specifically what I want to replace is my percent sign. I just want to get rid of my percent sign first, right? And then I want to replace it with nothing. So by not having a space here, I'm going in and I'm saying wherever there's a string, I want to see if there is a percent sign. I want to go ahead and replace it with nothing. I'm getting rid of that percent sign. Cool. Now I can, now if I say df.dtypes, I can still see my literacy rate is an object, right? So although I've changed the one thing that's throwing us off, what do I have to do secondly if I'm changing the value of a column? Anybody know?
Has type,
I'm sorry?
has type.
As type, exactly. So I'm gonna say df of literacy rate equals df of literacy rate dot as type of int. Oh, it's float, sorry. So now if I run dtypes, it's now float, which is supposed to be. But I still have one issue, right? If I say this df of literacy rate dot sort values, I still have this 45.38000. So let's go ahead and handle that as well.
And just have to multiply it by 100.
Not
Zero around, you
multiply,
divide by
super
100.
close. Yeah, you divide, but exactly. Yeah, we're gonna handle that same thing. Now, remember, I still have the percent filter that gets me, that got me that value, right? It's still equal to that specific value because I haven't overwritten that. So what I can do is I can say df.loc. I'm going to pass in my percent filter. That's just that row that was having an issue. And then I want to say that specific row's literacy rate. So that column of literacy rate is going to be equal to well, first off, if I just do this, let's see what it gives me. I just want to show you guys. 45.38. So now, just like Miranda said, I need to go ahead and change this value. So I'm going to say this is equal to, and I'm going to say df.loc. Oops, sorry. I'm going to say percent filter literacy over 100. Right, I'm taking that value and I'm just dividing it by 100. So now if I take this piece, and I run this, we see it's now 0.538, which is a appropriate value. So now I have cleaned that specific piece of data. Any questions on what we just did?
Oh, will you be sharing the file afterwards?
I'm sorry?
Will you be sharing the file, this file later?
I can, if you guys would like. I don't typically, because I typically don't share the file, but I can if you guys need. I don't know if I can, I'll be honest, because this is very, very, very similar to the exam. And so you could, in theory, not copy and paste, but I don't think I'm technically allowed to. I'm so sorry, but I will share the video so you guys can go through that.
Okay, thank you.
The video at the very
Yeah,
least would
so-
help.
Yeah, I can do the video. I don't think I can because obviously they're not the same. I wouldn't do this if they're the exact same, but they're pretty similar. So I don't want you to like just copy and paste and then not really know what's going on. That makes sense. Cool.
Understandable.
So now the next thing I have to do is we've done that, identified any inconsistencies and any inappropriate usual data points. So let's do this for my first two. We're going to kind of get going here because then I've got to do my visualization. So we got maybe I'm going to stop this in about 20 minutes. So I think we should be good. Okay. So any inconsistencies with my data. So let's go ahead and say any inconsistencies. I can't spell. One thing you guys have already probably learned with me is I have a terrible time spelling. Not my strong suit, friends. Inconsistencies. If that's not how you spell it, well, oh well. Okay. So I know that I've got my D types, right? So if I say df.d types, that gets me all these values. Remember, we have a secret to where we can say something like, I want to see what my D types is just going to equal my df.d types. So now I'm setting this as a variable. Perfect. And then I just want to look, and I always want to look at my objects to make sure there's no inconsistent pieces of data. And then secondly, we'll look at the other piece when we're dealing with our numeric values. So what I want to do is I just want my string calls. We've done that before. And that's going to be equal to my D types, which is what I just created. And then within that, I'm going to say D types equals object. So I'm going into my D type series, getting all of the D types that equals object. And then once I get that, I just want the index. That is going to just be a list. So if I say string calls, that's just going to be a list of the columns that are of type object, which is region, country, age for some reason, and gender. Age is an object. Look at my data. It's a weird object. I'm just going to run that. Oh, no. Oh, 15 plus. That's why it's a range. I gotta rerun it all. I gotta rerun it all because I just overwrote my DF. And so everything we did changed. F word. Okay. I think we should be good now. Let's just check real quick. df.info. Make sure that my type is, okay, all of this is max. Okay, so we are good to go. Sorry about that. Okay. So I've got my columns here that are of type object, and let's go ahead and for the sake of time, I'm just going to copy and paste this. Let's iterate through these and see if there's anything weird. So I'm going to run this. Cool. So this, again, just as a reminder, is going through these string columns, this list right here. And then for each time it's saying df of region for the first time, dot value counts. And then it goes to country dot value counts, then age, then gender. This drop in A means that if there is any missing values, then or null values, it'll show up in my value counts. Now there shouldn't be because we've already cleaned it, but that's what this drop in A is representing. So I can go and see and check. Do these all look good? Yep, they all look good. Okay. Now I might actually break this out even more if I was looking at this. I know that there's nothing wrong with it for right now, but I might actually break that out if I'm really looking at my data. I see my column age and then my gender. So that's sort of, can anybody see any issues with either column?
There's a plus symbol on the 15 plus, so I don't know if that's a typo or what, or.
It said
someone-
that was okay in the
Dictionary. But in the gender column, there's
Right.
female, male, and total.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. So I've got this female, male, and total. And then I've also got this 15 plus. Now, Ashley, what specifically were you talking about where it said it was okay?
right in the data dictionary, it says it's supposed to be an object because of the range for age. It says the data type. is
Yeah.
object, so it's okay. The 15 plus,
Mhm.
not the 5 plus. That's what I was saying.
Yeah. So if I'm looking at this, it's a little bit confusing if I'm being blatantly honest, because if I'm looking at this, this doesn't quite make sense to me. Because I technically 15 plus, all of these are 15 plus. Right, to where I would go, that's where I would go to a subject matter expert and say, hey, my data dictionary looks weird. So I'm gonna change from moving forward this iteration, this data dictionary, that doesn't make sense. Because what I would do if I was looking at this transparently is I would actually say anything below 15 makes more sense. 15 and below, right? Then I've got 15 to 24. That's literally that way every group is accounted for. So we're gonna do that. That data dictionary is weird, but that's what we're gonna go ahead and do is we're gonna make that to 15 and under. Then we've got or maybe 14 and under, kind of doesn't necessarily matter. Just because we're handling these values anyway. So we're just gonna take these and say under 15. And then just like Hadassah said, we've got a total, which doesn't make sense. So let's handle both of those and sort of figure out what we can do there, right? Specifically, I want to change this age. And we're running out of time, so we might just change one and then we'll see if we can change two. Okay. So for age, I want to go ahead and say I want it 15, and instead of the plus sign, I want this less than. I want to make it like less than 15. So what I want to do is I want to say df of age. All right, that's the column. Dot replace. What do I want to replace? I want to replace. Now, what I can do also is pass in this guy, which is 15. 15 plus. And then because I am handling all these values, I want to say 15 minus 15, less than 15. And then because I'm handling this in place equals true. So what this does is it goes through all of my 15 plus, and then we'll change it to 15 to less than 15. So then if I say df.age or df of age, I want dot value counts. Now I could say drop in A equals false, but I know that there's none. Okay, so now I've changed it to, now it's less than 15, 15 to 24. That makes more sense to me, and it's pretty equal with my data. So instead of just, sometimes I see students that just add that into the 15 and 24, but that doesn't make sense, right? Because technically 65 plus is older than 15. Cool. Now, if I wanted to handle this gender, how do you guys think we could handle that? What's a quick way we could handle that?
Well, considering the equal distribution of male and females, I guess you could just, I don't know, I mean, there could be a way to evenly distribute it, but I'm not quite sure how it's done.
Would this be one of the rare instances where you would drop the column? Because if they're both equal and it's saying that it's the total, is that giving it the total of female and male, or no?
Yeah, I probably wouldn't drop simply because that's about like 33%, right, of the data is sort of different. I wouldn't necessarily drop. We don't have time right now. What I would say is if you run into something similar, I don't think you will, but if you run into something similar on the exam, go in and investigate this column. And sort of, once we learn how to do correlation maps tomorrow, see if there's anything correlated and see if there's a way. And then just like David's saying, there is a way to distribute and change multiple things. And then you create a weight where you can say, you know, I want it half male, half female. If you wanted to do it that way. Also for right now, the other thing I'm looking at is for what we're trying to do, it's not necessarily gender specific. We're just wanting literacy rates, right? Doesn't matter for male or for female. And so you could actually probably just, this would be a time where you would talk to your subject matter expert and say, hey, what does this total mean? Because it's the exact same, but it's 33% of this entire thing.
In the data dictionary, it explains that the literacy rate has something to do with the total and thing over there. When they, yeah.
Yeah, I would want to look more into that and see, okay, so in order for us to get the literacy rate, we have this total, but totals in the gender, not in a total value, right? Like of 50 people, 20 of them are literate, right? So that's that total it's talking about. I think they're, although the same word, I think they're different. I don't think it has anything to do with this. But I'd be really curious to see why that says total. Yeah, I would dive more into that. We're approaching time and I want to do some visualizations, but dive into that, right? And again, that's one thing, like even I'm like, oh, I don't really know how I would handle that. I would dive more into it. If you were to, if you were to handle it in a specific way, explain to me why you handled it that way. And that's fine, right? Sort of say, oh, I investigated and I noticed that X was happening. So most of the totals were blank. So then therefore, that's why I put it, something of that nature. So just dive in and change it. If you wanted to distribute it male and female, that also makes a lot of sense. It is 33% of it. So sort of can change it there. You wouldn't want to just like, oh, total, I'm just gonna give it all to female, because that really could scale, what's the word I'm looking for? Not scale, but
Skew.
move your data. Yeah,
Skew.
but skew, that's the word. Thanks, friends. I've been doing this thing where I know the first like letter, I just don't know the word.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just said that.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. All right. So I would handle that as well. All right. So for the sake of time, we can identify any inappropriate sort of like numerical values where I can just say df.describe. And what this is going to get is my numeric values and say like, okay, well, my max is 1, my min is less than that. So obviously that's fine. Looks like the values are good there. And then from a year perspective, our minimum's 2010, our maximum's 2018. Okay, that's good. Making sure that it's not like 2044, something of that nature, right? 908, like that's from ages ago. So you want to make sure some of this data is good there with an average of like 213, an average of 81. Okay, cool. And we have a good count. So I've checked to make sure that there is no egregious values there. Okay. So now let's go on to visualizations. And I will honestly probably just do the univariate simply because I haven't taught you the other one yet. And we are a little bit over time. So I'm just going to do the univariate. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about how to do the multivariate, but you can just apply what we do tomorrow to this data as well. Okay. So if I'm wanting to do a univariate visualization, what are the three that I have access to?
Bar,
Mhm.
Instagram, and box plot.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So let's say I wanted to do a hist, right? I want to use histogram to look at specifically, what is my question asking me? What was the thing at the beginning I was sort of harping on? What are we wanting to know here? Anybody remember? Or go look at the question itself.
A strategy to increase the literacy.
Literacy rates, exactly, right? So I want to see the distribution of literacy rates. Okay, so this is one I haven't taught you yet, but because I brought in Seaborn, I'm going to show you. It's very, very simple and out of the box. Seaborn does a million things. Do you guys remember if I use Matplotlib, I had to create my filters for X and for Y, and I had to create all kinds of stuff. But very simply, I can just say SNS.histplot. Now, one thing that Seaborn needs is you have to pass in the data you're referring to. So you would say data equals df. And then what do I want to look at? In this case, in my df, I want my x-axis because it's a hist going across the x-axis. I want literacy rate. If I run this, I get this nice histogram. It already builds everything out for me, puts it in nice bins, makes it, does literacy rate and count. If you wanted to get rid of, if you ever want to get rid of like this gross part right here, you can just put a semicolon and I'll get rid of it. But this would be super sufficient. Maybe I'd go in and add a title if I wanted. Let's look at SNS.histplot. Let's see the things that we can pass in. Seaborn is awesome. So I pass in my data, my X, my Y, my hue. We're gonna talk about hue tomorrow. If I wanted to pass in bins, I can. There's tons of different things that I can pass in. A thresh, I can pass in all kinds of things. It's really, really awesome. Really, really, really powerful. And you can also see that all right there. Cool. So that would be super sufficient if you did this on the exam. And then you could just add in like a title. Okay. Now, another visualization I might want to look at is what's another one we can look at? We've got our histogram. Maybe I might want to look at, looking at this, it seems as if the majority of my values are, well, we already saw that my mean was like 81%. The majority of them are at 1, meaning that they are literate. So maybe I want to see, are there any outliers, right? Are there any just sort of really low pieces or these, this isn't an outlier because the majority is here, but are there any outliers? What's the one that I can use to see if there are any outliers?
Box plot.
Yeah, exactly. So this one I can just say, I can just do a couple things. I'm just gonna say df dot box plot. The column I want to look at is literacy rate. And this gives me a box plot here. Let's see if Seaborn's got a box plot. They do. So it's just dot box plot. Where I pass in my data and then X. So let's try that. Let's try it with Seaborn. I'm gonna say SNS dot box plot. I pass in my data equals DF. And then my X equals literacy rate. Literacy rate. Let's see the difference in what this creates for us. Okay, so you can see that it colors it. It gives us our literacy rate, makes it horizontal versus vertical. Again, either one would be super sufficient. We're not going super in depth with how to change colors and stuff. We're going to talk more about that tomorrow, but all of these would count. Now, one of the big things on your belt exam, this will be a huge piece. The last thing, this is what I'll finish on, is it's two different types. Each visualization must include a brief interpretation. So that's like, I think it's 0.5 points for each interpretation. So if you don't interpret any of your visualizations, you will automatically be down to an 8, which means if you miss one thing, then you fail the exam. So what I would do is I would look and interpret this histogram, right? It would say that, you know, the histogram shows that most of the data points correspond to a high literacy rate. Okay, so that's 0.5 points right there, because you told me, oops, you told me what this is telling me, right? Super simple, very easy, but if you don't do this, you will get counted off. I would do the same thing with my box plot. As well. Showing that majority of the data corresponds to high, but there are some outliers, right? Maybe that's something I would write. Something super simple there. Any questions?
Are you gonna go over SNS tomorrow?
Just a little bit, yeah. Yeah, I think we're gonna implement SNS a lot more tomorrow. Just out of the box, it's much nicer. But there is great documentation if you're wanting to say, you know, how do I do a bar graph? A bar plot. Let's just look at how we would do a bar plot with Seaborn. Let's say SNS dot bar plot. Pass in my data equals DF. Now, because this is categorical, I can't do literacy rate. So what if I did X equals country? I don't know, let's just see. I don't know, this could. Horizontal requires a numeric X. Oh.
Could you do a y equals? Or no?
Yeah, you could. There's no why it's saying that. Unless I have to say X equals. This is gonna look so ugly. Even Collab's stressed about it. That's super gross. Let's see.
If you put region instead of country, it looks a little bit nicer.
Oh, yes. Let's see, region. Okay, there we go. Hey, there we go. Thank you for that.
Mm.
Country had too many. I'm just wondering why it's going horizontal by default. But I couldn't do literacy rate. But this is, I mean, this right here is what we call a multivariate. Because now I have multiple columns, right? I've got my literacy rate column and I've got my country or region, sorry. And so this would be a multivariate. So there you guys go. If you guys did this, this would count as your multivariate. And so what you could do is see, that, what I would infer from this is that Europe and Northern America has the highest literacy rate, closely followed by Oceania and then Eastern and Southern Asia. And then Sub-Saharan Africa has the lowest. So that's just something I would write and then I would get the right answer there. So, but this is a multivariate, but it's nice though, because it already does region, does literacy rate, does them in all these colors. Here's our air bar. So it's like your variation of air. So Seaborn's pretty sweet, but cool. That's all I've got, friends. Was this helpful?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Cool. Does it help you see that this is all this is the expectation around the belt exam? Nothing crazy, like doing the group by assignments much, much harder than what you're trying to do, unless you're trying to do a really crazy multivariate or something of that nature. So take a deep breath. It's going to be okay. Work on filtering. Make sure you understand how filters work, how to change data, and you'll be okay. Any other questions, friends? I'll make sure this recording's up as soon as I get off here.
Able to just quickly go over how to extend the length of that country if you wanted to look at all the values, since there's so many. It was like 155. I think it was on line 54.
Sorry, what are you asking?
When we did the value count, you can see all of the countries. Yeah, right there.
Oh,
Yeah.
let's see.
How would you expand that?
So if I just did df of country, let's see if I just do dot value count tiers. Oops, valor. Okay, so it gives me that. Let's see. Dot value count compression.
I don't know if unique values will work. Maybe that might work better, but
Oh
I don't
yeah.
know.
Let's see if I do in unique. Good catch, David. No, because that's 155 unique values. Let's see. Let's go into here. It's false. Or return proportions rather than frequencies. Just did. Before compression. Let me look into it and then I can let you know by tomorrow. I don't want to just sit on the recording. So let me actually stop the recording.